Muchas gracias a...
Thank you very much. And I would like to remind you that before the hearing, the Commissioner-designate replied to the written questions in a questionnaire, and the answers have been distributed to members in all languages. I would also like to remind you that the Committee on Legal Affairs assessed the question of potential or actual conflicts of interest and hasn't raised any objections to the holding of this hearing. So now I would like to explain the structure of the confirmation hearing. First of all, the Commissioner-designate will make an opening statement of no longer than 15 minutes. At the end of the meeting, he will also be given 5 minutes for his closing statement. And after the introductory statement, we will move on to questions from the members of the European Parliament. The confirmation hearing will be broken down into 4 rounds. First of all, the political group coordinators with 5-minute slots each, 1 minute for the question and 2 minutes for the answer from the Commissioner-designate. And there is a possibility for a follow-up question from the same member of no longer than 1 minute and 1 minute for the reply. The second round will consist of 3-minute slots each based on the overall distribution of speaking time among the political groups, including a non-attached member. The third round will be a question posed by the chair of the ENVI committee as the invited committee, and if my information is right, that Pietro Fiocchi, one of the vice chairs, will be representing the ENVI committee, and who will ask 1 question with a 3-minute slot. There will be a final round of questions by representatives of each political group in reverse order, also with 3-minute slots each, 1 plus 2. All slots of 3 minutes will be divided into 1 minute for a question and 2 minutes for the answer. And I would really like to urge you to respect your speaking time. Please stick to it, and please don't speak too quickly because we have interpretation. I would like to remind you that we have interpretation available today in 3 languages, and that means that all speakers can use their own language. Mr. Kadis will be speaking in English. Then he will answer the first round of questions in Greek, unless the question is asked in English and he decides to answer in English. And then he will also be giving his closing statement in English. I would also like to inform you that this confirmation hearing is being web streamed on the Parliament's website, and that will also be possible to access a video recording of the hearing on the same site. Let me say that this is a key hearing. The common fisheries policy is one of the most comprehensive policies of the European Union. It is designed to make sure that we have proper fisheries management across the board. It's about striking a balance between the conservation of marine areas and fishery sources, and at the same time make sure there's economic stability for coastal communities. And at the same time, we want to make sure that there is food security in the EU. These are our main goals. So we firmly believe that this new term for the Parliament and the Commission will be a fruitful period to strike this balance. And we'd also like to thank Mr. Kadis for his answers to the written questions, and a particular thanks to him for being available to work hand in hand with us. He has said that he would like to work with the European Parliament. This is extremely important against the backdrop of the overhaul of the framework agreement between the European Parliament and the Commission, in particular regarding your commitment to be present in committees and plenaries regularly. You have also committed to following up on Parliament's legislative initiatives and sharing information in a timely manner with the Parliament, since we are a co-lawmaker and an arm of the budgetary authority. We count on the full implementation of these commitments, and we really would like to underscore the Commission's role as an honest broker in all legislative procedures and interinstitutional negotiations, ensuring equal treatment of the Parliament and the Council. I also count on your full cooperation to inform our committee in advance of all upcoming proposals, with detailed justifications for those requiring urgent action. In this way, we can ensure transparency, and it will allow the European Parliament to properly exercise its prerogatives. Now, without further ado, I would like to start with the confirmation hearing, and I would like to give the floor to the Commissioner-designate, Mr. Costas Kadis. He will give his introductory statement, a maximum of 15 minutes. You have the floor, sir, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honourable Chair, honourable members of the European Parliament, good afternoon. Before I begin, allow me to take a moment to express my deepest sympathy and solidarity with the people of Valencia, who have suffered immensely because of the recent flood. This great disaster reminds us of the need to intensify our response to climate change with adaptation and mitigation measures and increase our resilience to such events. The people of Valencia need our support, the support of the European Union, and we must address this matter as one of our highest priorities. Honourable members of the European Parliament, I'm immensely honoured to join you today for this hearing as Commissioner-designate for Fisheries and Oceans. I'm well aware of the great importance of this portfolio entrusted to me by President von der Leyen and the challenges it entails. My scientific background, past government positions, and the very fact of being myself a European islander have prepared me and motivated me for this role. I'm a biologist by training and a professor of biodiversity conservation. I am a strong believer in the power of research as a tool for innovation and the importance of science as the basis for policy making, which is extremely important for this particular portfolio. My teaching and research in biodiversity have given me deep insights into how important it is to ensure the health and productivity of our ecosystems. I have also come to appreciate the crucial role of local communities in sustainable development. Conservation measures are most effective when developed with their cooperation and their support. Beyond my academic career, I have also served in several ministerial posts. I was Minister of Health, then Education and Culture, and most recently, Agriculture, Rural Development and Environment. In that most recent role, I was for 5 years responsible for implementing policies related to fisheries and marine research, and participated actively in most agri-fish ministerial councils. I strongly believe in the importance of democratic institutions, such as the European and national parliaments. If confirmed, I'm committed to work closely with you, maintaining an open channel of communication and cooperation. I also strongly believe that promoting the values of the European Union is fundamental to our work. If confirmed, I will ensure that all policies and initiatives within my portfolio are grounded in the principles of democracy, human rights, sustainability, and the rule of law. Honourable members, the creation of a dedicated fisheries and oceans portfolio is a recognition of the importance the Commission gives to the fisheries and blue economy sectors, including our coastal communities, as well as to the health of our oceans. Europe relies on the oceans and seas for its prosperity and security, and its unique ability to regulate the climate as the biggest carbon sink of the planet. What we do to preserve our oceans and our communities is important for our people today and for our future generations. We must secure sustainable, resilient and competitive fisheries and aquaculture sectors in the European Union. We must further promote our blue economy, and we must protect our oceans and ensure their coherent and sustainable use. These will be my guiding principles as European Commissioner for Fisheries and Oceans if I earn your trust today. Fisheries and aquaculture have a long tradition deeply rooted in the European cultural heritage. The people behind these sectors provide us daily with a source of healthy protein and play an indisputable role in the European Union's food security. But this noble profession is facing a number of challenges: environmental degradation, competition for maritime space, overfishing or even illegal fishing, lack of international level playing field, and the need for modernization. At the same time, the challenges faced by our small-scale fishers are very different from the challenges faced by large-scale and distant water fleets. And challenges also differ from one sea basin to another, from the Baltic and the Mediterranean and the Black Sea to the North Atlantic Ocean and our outermost regions. I intend to tackle these challenges comprehensively, but also in a targeted manner. Ensuring the sustainability of the fisheries sector goes hand in hand with ensuring the sustainability of the ecosystems it depends on. This is why I will support Member States in implementing EU legislation to ensure healthy and productive marine ecosystems. In parallel, I will lead the comprehensive evaluation of the common fisheries policy to ensure that it is fit in today's evolving context and can address emerging challenges. The evaluation will include a broad stakeholder consultation through all our forums of engagement. If confirmed as Commissioner, I will come to this committee to present and discuss with you the results which are expected by the end of next year. And let me make a promise today. If the evaluation points to weaknesses, I will not hesitate to recommend the necessary legislative action to refine and enhance the common fisheries policy, preceded by an impact assessment or any other appropriate measures. The evaluation of the CFP will also feed into our vision for the fisheries and aquaculture sector with a 2040 perspective. It will pay equal attention to environmental, social and economic dimensions, including the necessary modernization and the decarbonization of our fleets. In this context, I will be attentive to the social dimension. Improving our competitiveness also means taking action about the way we trade with third countries and the way we market our own sustainable production in the EU. I want us to achieve a better level playing field for our hard-working fishers by promoting the European Union standards in all international forums. I will work closely with my fellow commissioners to better valorize sustainable fishing products on the European market and leverage the power of the internal market. The sector needs to be part of the discussions on the future of our food system. Of equal importance is to ensure stability and predictability of access to traditional EU fishing grounds and historical quotas in the Northeast Atlantic. I will make sure that in the relationship with the UK post-2026, the interests of our fishers are safeguarded, as we did in the negotiations of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. I will also make sure that fisheries are part of a comprehensive approach to our bilateral relations with Norway, building on the successful high-level dialogue that has been started a few months ago. Moreover, I will lead the efforts for a renewed approach to our sustainable fisheries partnership agreements in line with our regional strategies and priorities. I will further lead global efforts for a zero-tolerance approach to illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. At the same time, I will dedicate much of my attention to developing the full potential of the EU aquaculture while improving animal welfare standards. Investing in aquaculture will help us to reduce our dependence on imports and create green jobs and sustainable growth. The competitiveness and resilience of the fisheries sector will largely depend on its ability to diversify its sources of energy and decrease the vulnerability to high fuel prices. By the end of 2025, I will deliver the energy transition roadmap for the fisheries and aquaculture sector's carbon neutrality with a 2050 perspective. Moreover, a competitive and resilient sector is a sector that takes into account the social dimension. I would like us to address issues such as occupational health and safety, the aging boats, labour and skills shortages, the prominent gender gap, the aging workforce, and the need for generational renewal. These issues will be the core of the Fisheries and Oceans dialogues that I will hold. The Fisheries and Oceans dialogues will also play a role in the development of a European Oceans Pact, which will frame a holistic and coherent approach across all policy areas linked to the ocean. The Pact will pursue three strategic objectives, all of equal importance: pursuing healthy and productive oceans and protect biodiversity, boosting an EU blue economy, and expanding European Union's marine knowledge framework. The Pact will be a roadmap for the mandate to come, and we aim to present it in time for the 2025 Ocean Conference in Nice next June 2025. It aims at maintaining the climate mitigating role of the oceans while developing the economic potential. Research and innovation are the driving forces for a competitive and resilient blue economy and for effectively protecting our oceans. I will therefore prepare the European Union Ocean and Research and Innovation Strategy. I will also support the Member States in optimizing spatial planning to better achieve the objectives for nature and energy, food production, shipping, maritime safety and security. I want the fisheries sectors also engaged in the process. I will further explore the feasibility of European blue carbon reserves, as well as other possibilities for developing a new blue economy model for our coastal communities. In this context, I will also contribute to the climate adaptation plan, as coastal areas are highly vulnerable to the negative impact of climate change. You have seen what happened a few days ago in Valencia. Of course, the European Union cannot work alone to ensure that oceans are used sustainably. This is a global endeavour, and this is why I want to strengthen our ocean diplomacy. The European Union must continue to lead the global efforts to deliver on the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, especially SDG 14, Life Below Water. To do this, I will ensure that the EU steps up its leadership on the protection and restoration of the marine environment in Europe and globally. I will also work towards the entry into force of the High Seas Treaty ahead of the United Nations Oceans Conference in Nice in June 2025. This also includes the necessary incorporation into EU law with a specific goal of protecting at least 30% of the high seas by 2030. Honourable members of the European Parliament, I'm well aware that this is a busy agenda. This is my plan. It has been enriched through my exchanges with you. You shared with me the worries and the concerns of the European citizens you represent. I have listened to you carefully. If confirmed as Commissioner, one of my very first actions will be to visit our coastal communities on the ground. I want to listen to them and assure them that decisions taken in Brussels will reflect their concerns and their aspirations. I want them to know that they will have a champion in me, because I am one of them, an islander from Cyprus. In these efforts, I would like to have you, honourable members of the European Parliament, by my side, because we have a European goal in common, a strong and resilient fisheries sector and a global lead in the preservation and sustainable use of our precious ocean. Thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Costas Kadis. I would like to open the first round of questions that will be asked by the political group coordinators. We have 5-minute slots, 1 minute for your question, and the Commissioner-designate can answer in 2 minutes, and there is the possibility of a follow-up question. Please stick to your speaking time so that we can make sure we have a dynamic hearing and so that everyone has the time to take part in it. So the first political coordinator is from the EPP, Mr. Gabriel Mato.
Gracias, Comisario.
Thank you very much, Commissioner-designate, for your solidarity with Spain and Valencia. The crisis right now and what we've experienced over the last 10 years, well, we've seen the necessity to have a robust CFP. There have been a number of different legislative proposals for reforming the CFP. Will you take on board what the Parliament has suggested? Decarbonization, generational renewal, absolutely necessary. We have to get rid of this construction of new vessels with public funds, move away from that particular approach and establish a system which involves decarbonization of vessels and regulations which will facilitate that as well for energy security, safety, and so forth. There are specific idiosyncrasies in fisheries, and those are not taken on board in the CFP, particularly on the social front. So finally, the aquaculture situation in Europe, we see that there are a number of problems there, and what's out there to support it is not sufficient. We need to boost aquaculture in the sector, and I wanted to ask what you intend to do on that front. Thank you.
Kadis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mato. Mr. Kadis.
Mr. Mato, as I mentioned in my introductory speech, CFP evaluation will be one of the key milestones in my term. A comprehensive evaluation, as you know, is ongoing. I can assure you that it will be carried out up in the highest standards and will take into consideration the views of all stakeholders. We want to build on the positive aspects of the CFP because CFP has produced positive results and address any weaknesses that will be pointed out by the evaluation. Regarding the capacity ceilings, as you know, this issue is very relevant to our commitments to international organizations and international commitments relating to achieving SDG 14. However, it is a parameter that will be evaluated in the framework of the CFP evaluation. And I want to assure you that taking into consideration the result of the evaluation, but also taking into consideration some other studies that are ongoing. For example, the study on the evolution of the European fishing fleet and the energy transition roadmap that will be prepared and announced by the end of next year, we will have all the knowledge basis to take the right decision towards decarbonization and modernization of our fishing fleet. Regarding aquaculture, it is very important that we have the strategy and that the member states have developed their action plans in order to achieve the targets included in the strategy. I will make sure that the member states will have all the support by the European Commission in order to implement these strategic guidelines and the targets. What is important is the member states to set specific targets to be achieved through their action plan. The Commission will support them in achieving these targets.
Gracias, señor Kadis. Señor Mato.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mato.
Gracias por la respuesta.
Thank you very much for the response. I'm very glad, Commissioner-designate, that one of the key issues is evaluation of the CFP on the numerous fronts that you mentioned. And one thing that we ought to focus on is the landing obligation. It's necessary to institute changes there as well. I think it's important to speak about the social dimension as well. Decarbonization, very, very difficult. We need more efficient vessels and we need more efficient systems. That affects, of course, the sector altogether and the capacity that exists in the sector. So we want people to be able to fish better, not more. So it's quality that we're striving for. And as I mentioned, we need more than what is out there right now. And indeed, aquaculture can provide on that particular front. It can guarantee the food security and safety that we need, aquaculture. Thank you very much.
Señor Kadis.
Mr. Kadis?
Yes, regarding the landing obligation, this issue was raised by you and by many members of the Parliament during our bilateral meetings. It is, I understand, an issue that is of the concern of many members, of many fishers, and it will be addressed again through the CFP evaluation. On the other hand, we have to have in mind what was the reason behind this, this obligation. There are data, there is scientific information or data gathered by the sector that show that up to 40% of the catches are discarded back in the sea. You understand that this is not sustainable. This does not contribute to the sustainability of our resources, to the biodiversity conservation, even to the profitability of the fishers themselves. So we have to address the problem of bycatches. I'm not dogmatic. After the evaluation, we will have all the information, and based on the information that we will have in front of us, we can take the best decisions. If there are alternatives that can address the issue of bycatches, we can discuss how we can implement these alternatives, and we are open to discuss. Now, regarding the social dimension and the relation of the social dimension with the fishing fleet, the answer is very similar to what I answered in the first question. We will have the results of the evaluation of the CFP. We will have the results of the study on the evolution of the fishing fleet. And we will also have the roadmap for the energy transition. All this information...
disculpe,
Mr. Kadis, I'm afraid you've run out of time. It's 1 minute for the final part. But you will have time at some other point to answer similar questions. Thank you.
Pasamos al siguiente.
Thank you very much. We can move on to the next coordinator, Mr. André Rodriguez from the Socialists and Democrats. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Commissioner, I don't have very much time in this round, so I'm going to focus on two issues, the CFP and the Oceans Pact. In your mission letter, there is reference to an exhaustive evaluation of the CFP. You already touched upon some issues which are crucial, and I was wondering whether you could tell us whether you are committing specifically to improving the fishers' income by dealing with small-scale and artisanal fisheries in a better way so that we can have prosperous coastal communities and better use of resources in Europe. Now, when it comes to the CFP budget, are you planning to boost it? And when it comes to the Oceans Pact, what link do you think there is between the Pact and the CFP? And can the Pact help us implement the CFP more effectively? How are you going to finance the Pact? And how are you going to make sure that the Pact has the necessarily environmental ambition? And how will it help with biodiversity and climate resilience? Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Kadis.
Of course, I cannot prejudge which will be the results of the evaluation, but I would be very surprised if issues like the ones that we already discussed here, the landing obligation, the capacity ceilings, the social dimension with the generational gap, the need for modernization and decarbonization, all these issues, I'm sure that they will be pointed out by the evaluation, and we can discuss measures to address these issues. But I cannot prejudge from now which will be the outcome of the evaluation. Regarding the relation of the Ocean Pact with the CFP, CFP will be an integral part of the Ocean Pact because it is an ocean-related policy. It affects and it is affected by other ocean-related policies. So it will be an integral part. Actually, the CFP will be, the implementation of the CFP regulation will be facilitated because it will be implemented in coordination with other related policies. So we need this coordination, we need this coherent approach which will characterize the Ocean Pact, and definitely it will facilitate the implementation of the CFP.
Señor Rodríguez.
Senhor Comissário, agradeço as suas respostas.
Thank you very much, Commissioner-designate, for your replies. I have two more questions for you. First of all, the link with the Executive Vice President and the way your portfolio is set up. What are your plans to cooperate with the Reforms Commissioner when it comes to the Oceans Pact? What guarantees can you give us so that we are sure that the CFP is in line with the needs of coastal communities? And when it comes to the fishing fleet in outermost regions, as you know, we're talking about small-scale fisheries and small-scale fishing in these areas. And as you know, if you have more efficient vessels, you also have higher energy costs. So how are you going to help the fishers in these communities to achieve these goals, especially when it comes to modernizing their fleet?
Regarding my cooperation with Vice President Fido, I think that we can develop very well synergies with Mr. Fido. My portfolio and the missions under my portfolio are very well related to the coastal communities. I mean, fisheries, aquaculture, blue economy are very much related with the development of and the prosperity of coastal communities. This is also a task of the cohesion policy, and I believe that we can have synergies in promoting the sustainable development of coastal communities. I can tell you that I have already met with Mr. Fito, and he's in line with this approach, and this is the approach that we will adopt. Regarding, I don't know if I have time, regarding the outermost region, I'm sure that I will have later more time, but one word, one sentence. We recognize that they have they have many specificities, and I'm committed in continuing supporting this region in every manner that I have in my power.
Pasamos al turno.
Now, to Patriots for Europe. Mr. Ton Diepeven, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Kadis, thank you very much for answering the written questions. You just heard from another colleague talking about the landing obligation. I don't need to put a question on that because you've already answered much of that. But in your introduction, you talked about the negotiations that are coming down the road with the UK, and they're going to be important for our fishers. I'd like to go into a little more depth on this. How are you going to deal with the landing obligation and the trade and cooperation agreement with the UK? Are you going to be broaching this with our British partners? It's absolutely essential that we avoid any kind of clash of legislation which will work against our fishers and undermine fair cooperation. So I'd like to hear what you have to say on that. Thank you.
The political guidelines of President von der Leyen are clear. We need to strengthen our relations with the United Kingdom, and this is what I will try to do. I will try to have a positive agenda with the UK, but a prerequisite for this positive agenda is the respect of the political and legal commitments relating to our fishers. We want our fishers to have access to the fishing grounds that traditionally used to fish and the shared quotas. So if there are disagreements, there are available tools at the disposal of the European Commission, and the recent case of the sand deal, I think, is indicative of what can be done. What I can assure you is that our decisions will place the European fishers in the center and their interests in the center of our attention.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Kadis. Chair, I do have a supplementary question. On the implementation of rules, we've seen that our fishers are having to cope with a burden of red tape. This bureaucracy is affecting them and an increase in production costs, and this is affecting a sector that's already under pressure. So, Mr. Kadis, are you prepared to take specific steps to reduce bureaucracy and lower costs so that our fishers have an honest chance to operate in this sphere? I know you mentioned this in your introductory remarks, but I'd like to hear a little more detail. Thank you.
both in the political guidelines of President von der Leyen and the mission letter addressed to me. It is clear that we have to move towards a faster and more competitive and less bureaucratic Europe. These elements I want to characterize also all the policies that are under my portfolio. One of my first priorities, if I confirm today, will be to ask DG Mare to screen all the procedures that are under my portfolio and prepare a report indicating where and how we can reduce bureaucracy and how we can make our sectors more digital, less bureaucratic, and moving faster, especially when this is related with the relation with the European citizens. Based on this exercise, my target is to reduce bureaucracy by 30 to 35%. That was the target set by President von der Leyen, and I will be focused in achieving this target.
Muchas gracias. Es ahora con...
Thank you very much. Now the coordinator from the ECR, Stefan Bartulica.
Kadis, welcome to this hearing. Allow me to switch to Croatian. Nije postignuta dobra ravnoteža između očuvanja morskih resursa.
Now, we haven't achieved balance between protection of marine resources and welfare for fishers. So there's a lot to do on the social dimension. And we have to take into consideration the interest of small local fishers as well. Many are complaining, they are concerned about unnecessary burden that they bear and costs which are extremely high, but above all, red tape that they have to confront in their work. 70% of all produced in the waters of Europe come from third countries. Now, can we change this particular figure in order to create a situation more beneficial for our fishers?
Well, I agree with you that small-scale fishers play a very important role, especially for our coastal communities. They have 76% of the fishing vessels are small scale, and 50% of the employment are in the small scale fisheries. So it is really a very important segment of the fishing fleet. In the current framework, there are several incentives, and there are provisions in favor of the small-scale fishers. But I think that there is room for improvement. The CFP evaluation, I think, will show how far we can go. For example, we need a more fair and transparent way of allocation of quotas to the small-scale fishers. We need to make sure that the allocation of the budget by the member states to the different fishing fleets are take into consideration the specificities of the small-scale fishers. So I will actively listen to the sector, to the small-scale fishers, and I will actively involve even the members of the parliament and the member states in order to find ways to further support this very, very important part of our fishing fleet, the small-scale fishers.
Hvala. Drugo pitanje se odnosi na uredbu.
Thank you very much. The second question concerns the regulation concerning the Mediterranean regulation as it's known, which sets standards for the technical parameter for the gear that's used. It's from 2006, so from 20 years ago, essentially, almost 20 years ago. And I'd like to ask how you would like to deal with this particular issue. Regionalization now, and the principle of regionalization in the future proposals for the regulation, how will that be taken on board? I'm thinking about the Mediterranean and about the Adriatic as well, actually. Thank you.
The Mediterranean regulation is very important for protecting certain specific types of habitat that they are very important for the Mediterranean and for the European Union. I know that there is possibility for derogation, and some member states utilize this possibility, but I cannot see how and why this regulation should be changed, because it is very focused on the protection of certain very important marine habitats. Regarding regionalization, it is a very it's a valuable principle that can be implemented in order to address regional challenges. And the European Commission already, but if confirmed, I will further strengthen the support on regionalization initiatives. So this will be my approach in the future.
A continuación.
Our next speaker, coordinator from the Renew Europe, Emma Wiesner.
So much. Let me be abundantly clear. Without healthy oceans, our fishing sector will not be economically viable. The CFP has done a lot to support the ecosystem-based approach, but still lots more needs to be done. One clear example is the Baltic Sea, which the ecosystem and the fish stocks are in the verge of collapse, but still fishing quotas this year was increased. And this tells us that the CFP is not doing enough, taking the different factors in different sea basins into consideration. So my question on behalf of Renew, will you commit not only to the comprehensive approach in your written questions where you give an answer, but also the targeted review, if found necessary, to strengthen the ecosystem-based approach, to reduce the administrative burden for the SMEs and our fishermen, and also diversify the indicators on which the fish stocks calculations are done, such as the age and size distributions of the stocks? Thank you.
The beginning of your intervention was very similar to my initial, to my introductory speech, because I stress how important it is to have healthy ecosystems in order to have healthy fishing stocks. So this is our approach also. In the case of the Baltic Sea, we know that there are some issues of misreporting, that reliable data are essential for scientific advice. And indeed, data received from operators and member states would not, I could say that would not, were not at the highest standards. And I was informed by the Commission that they identified weaknesses in the implementation of the rules which led to misreporting. So it is very important to to collect the high quality and quantity of data in order to support our scientific community to provide accurate advice. I answered before how to reduce the administrative burden. so I will not repeat my answer. Regarding the methodology for providing the fishing, for deciding the fishing opportunities, we will fully respect the scientific advice and the scientific community. We feel that they can, they should keep their independency. They know better from all of us how they should work in order to prepare the best possible advice. And actually we rely on them in order to make the most accurate and most efficient decisions. So good cooperation with the scientific community is one of the priorities will be one of the priorities during my mandate.
Okay, thank you. Will you then review the Baltic Sea map? Yes and no question. Now on another topic, ocean diplomacy, because if elected, you will soon go to the UN Ocean Conference in Nice. What would you see is the main key issue that EU should raise during this meeting? And ahead of this, you mentioned that you also want to present the Oceans Pact, and I think everyone in this room is interested to hear a little bit more on the content. So if you can please be precise and concrete on the content, not just what mentioned in your introductory speech. I think all of us would be very interested in that. But also the legislative framework of this Ocean Pact. Will it have a legal ground and serve as a legal basis, propose legislative proposals, or will it be yet just one other communication ending up in our desk drawers? So please, a little bit more on the content, but also the legal basis of the Ocean Pacts and your messages on the UN conference. Thanks.
The Ocean Pact will be the strategic framework under which all ocean-related policies will be placed. It will not necessarily include new legislative action. It will facilitate coordination between different policies. It will facilitate coordination between interrelated policies and activities. The activities that are relevant to addressing climate change, pollution, biodiversity, are very relevant to the fishing, to the maritime spatial planning, to the activities that are taking place outside and in the marine environment. So the Ocean Pact will promote the coordination between all these activities and will facilitate the implementation and enforcement of the current legislation, which is, I think, it is effective. So this will be the main philosophy behind the Ocean Pact, and will be presented in the Nice conference as a model of ocean governance. And I think that this way the European Union will lead the way towards a more coherent and more sustainable management of our oceans.
Gracias. Ahora es el turno de los...
Thank you very much. The Greens now, Coordinator Isabella Lövin.
Thank you very much, Commissioner-designate. Healthy oceans are providing us with crucial ecosystem services, such as production of oxygen, carbon sink, and etc. Yet they are struggling to survive from human impacts. So we really need a recovery plan for our oceans, and the Ocean Pact could be just that. And you call the Ocean Pact a single strategic reference framework for all ocean-related policies, and this is extremely good. You just explained a little bit how you think, I think it's extremely important that we make sure that other policies that might run counter to the objective of recovering the ocean are really framed in a way that your colleagues will not have policy areas where we actually are contributing to eutrophication, pollution, litter or noise, plastic pollution, etc. So how will you make sure that all the policy areas are streamlined? Will there be a legal basis? I was not really clear on that answer. And how we really make sure that this is a recovery plan and that we don't repeat the stovepipe silo approach that has caused the problems we have today. Thank you.
As I mentioned in my previous answer, it is not necessary to have new legislations. I think that we have enough legislations. The most important element of the Ocean Pact is that we coordinate the enforcement and implementation of the current legislation. Regarding the recovery plan, as you mentioned, for example, all the related policies to the recovery, like the restoration law, for example, will be facilitated because it will be implemented in a coordinated way with other relevant policies, like the CFP. The way that we carry out the management of our fishing stocks, the way that we care about the marine environment so that we'll be more productive is very relevant to the recovery of our degraded environmental areas, important environmental areas. So this will be the relation. Coordination is the key element. Coordination and a holistic approach are the key elements of the Ocean Pact.
Thank you, Commissioner. I wish you all the best to keep all your colleagues on the right track there. You said that science, you look at science as a basis for policy making. And what we are experiencing now when it comes to setting the TACs is that we have very uncertain scientific advice in some areas of the European Union. We can see that you're talking yourself about the misreporting in the Baltic Sea. How are you going to make sure that you can, that the advice that we get from our scientists are really reflecting the precautionary approach and the ecosystem approach? And the Commission has the possibility to ask any scientific advice in relation to setting fishing quotas. So will you ask for advice on options to restore ocean ecosystems and rebuild fish stocks rather than just continuing with business as usual? Thank you.
I will seek the cooperation with the scientific bodies in order to secure the highest quality of scientific advice from these bodies. And it is my intention very soon, if I confirmed, very soon after being in office to meet with the representatives of the scientific bodies and discuss with them how the Commission can support their work. It is very important to have the cooperation of the scientific community. I believe that securing strong and sound scientific basis will facilitate the more efficient and more effective decisions. And this will be clearly our approach.
Ahora es el turno.
Now it is Mrs. Emma Fourreau from the left.
Monsieur le
Commissioner-designate, thank you very much for your answers. So you are confirming these rumors that the CFP might be overhauled with the danger that environmental goals will be scaled back. You would be making a serious mistake. You're a marine biologist. You should be aware of this. For the sake of fisheries and marine ecosystems, we cannot allow for any backsliding at a time when certain provisions of the CFP aren't even implemented. I'm thinking, for example, of Article 17. That means that where member states are supposed to allocate fishing quotas on the basis of economic, environmental and social criteria. But at the moment, quota allocation favors big ship owners to the detriment of small-scale fishers. It gives a blank check to factory boats that respect working conditions less and that harm the marine environment. And it's small-scale fishers that are left out in the cold. And yet it is they who help the local social fabric, fish auctions, markets, and wholesale fish trade, local markets and restaurants. France has already, the court has already found against it for not respecting Article 17 for bluefin tuna quotas. So my question is very simple. Will you commit to not reopening the CFP? And what are you planning to do to make sure that Article 17 is implemented properly and effectively? Thank you.
There is an evaluation going on, and what I assure you is that this evaluation of the CFP will be conducted up in the highest standards. It will take into consideration the views of all stakeholders, including the Parliament, institutional ones like the Parliament, but also the NGOs, national and regional authorities, also the sector, aquaculture and fisheries sector, and every interested person or organization. And if this exercise points out to weaknesses, I will propose measures to address these weaknesses, and I will not shy away. Regarding Article 17, it's up to the member states to implement correctly the article. I will make sure that the European Commission prepares and distributes to the member states guidelines on the proper implementation of Article 17. And I will also issue a vademecum, which is it's a system that it will praise all the best practices adopted by the member states in the implementation of Article 17. So there are plans for promoting the proper implementation of this very important, I agree with you that it is very important article, especially for the small-scale fishers.
Merci beaucoup pour votre réponse. Je pense effectivement.
Thank you very much for your answer. I think it is up to the European Commission to make sure that Article 17 is respected, because otherwise it falls on the shoulders of small-scale fishers. They have taken this case to court, but it's been 7 years. 95% of bluefin tuna quotas are allocated to industrial fishers that have already fished a lot and have already sold everything to Asia. This is unfair, and they are the ones who were saying, I was a longliner in Brittany who told me this. I don't have the right to fish because most quotas have been consumed for export to Japan. We've got very difficult years, while a 10-ton allowance would allow us. It would help us. It would help the local economy, restaurants, markets, but that is not the case. So denied these. So for Guen, the fisher that I quoted, I hope the Commission will come down hard and make sure that Article 7 is implemented properly.
As I mentioned before, I agree with you the importance of this article. It is a responsibility of the member states to implement it. I'm ready to discuss with you, with the member states, if there is a need for the Commission to impose different measures. But I'm not sure that this will be welcomed by the governments. I don't. We can discuss it. I'm open. What I assure you is that from our side, if confirmed, I will take specific measures like the guidelines and like the vademecum to promote the transparent and effective implementation of Article 17.
Es el turno de ex.
Thank you very much. Mr. Siegbert Droese from the ESN.
Ja, Frau Vorsitzende, vielen Dank.
Thank you, Chairman. On this happy day, I'd like to take this opportunity to wish Donald Trump all the best for his fantastic success. I'm very pleased for the American people in particular that they've elected such a fantastic leader, and I think it serves as an example for our European nations and peoples. Commissioner-designate, in May this year, the EU adopted a regulation on reducing methane emissions in the energy sector throughout Europe and in the energy provision chains around the world. It's very strange that the biggest release of methane gas ever seemed to give very little cause for concern for the Commission. And this was the Nord Stream 2 explosion, and this was caused by people. Yes, it was sabotage, even if the people who are responsible for this haven't been caught. Can we assume that you, as future Commissioner, will look into the investigation of the Nord Stream 2 explosion when you're talking about healthy ecosystems? That's why I put the question. Thank you.
Let me also take this opportunity and congratulate President Trump and express our willingness to collaborate with the new USA administration, the new USA government. I was informed by the services about this incident. What was reached to me as an information is that the linkage of the gas stopped about 2 years ago, October 2022, and the damage that was caused to the ecosystem was locally and was adjacent to the area that was the linkage. Let me be clear. Even 1 ton of this gas to be released, it's a problem. But taking into consideration the reports and the information that I have, there not seem to be a problem at this moment in the area. What was caused was very local and affected only the area around the linkage.
Well, Commissioner, maybe you didn't quite understand. I didn't get an answer as far as I'm aware, so maybe I can try and make it a little more specific and give you some figures, because you don't seem to have sufficient amount of information. Given the fact that 478,000 tons of methane was released, and methane is 80 times more powerful as a GHG than CO2, don't you think you should look into this? Are you going to push for an investigation to find who was responsible, which people or nations, because it seems to have been a act of sabotage, deliberate sabotage. You haven't given an answer, and if you're not intending to do that, why not? If the EU is so consider the methane emissions directive so important, why won't you do this?
I assure you that I will look into this issue. The data that I have are different than the ones that you just presented. What I have as an information is that the amount of gas leaked was 150,000 tons, and this is negligible. On a global scale, it's only 0.02% of global anthropogenic emissions. Let me repeat that even one cubic meter of this gas is not desirable. I mean, it's harmful. But the situation now is, according to the information that I have, is in control. But I assure you that I will look again into this issue, and maybe you can send me your information and cross-check the data that we have.
Terminamos esta primera ronda.
So that brings us to the end of the first round. Thank you to the coordinators and Mr. Kadis, and we can move on to the second round. We have 28 questions that will be put to Mr. Kadis by different MEPs on the basis of the political group order. 3 minutes in total, 1 minute for the question and 2 minutes for the answer. So we can start the round with the EPP Vice Chair, Mr. Smith.
Gracias, Presidente. Honourable Commissioner-designate, happy to have a Commissioner-designate for Fisheries among us. You already mentioned bycatches and others addressed the regulatory burden, justly so. My question is regarding selectivity. Although selectivity itself is not an explicit goal of the CFP, it's nevertheless considered a central element in reducing bycatches, particularly in mixed demersal fisheries. As the future Commissioner for Fisheries and Oceans, will you prioritize improving selectivity as well as its research, development and progression, and drive it forward with financial support and in a technology open way? Thank you very much.
Yes, in principle, selectivity is a very useful approach because it reduces bycatch, it reduces the impact on the environment, on biodiversity, on the ecosystems. So it is, as a principle, it is very useful. Definitely will be one of the priorities under the research and innovation strategy, Ocean Research and Innovation Strategy that we will prepare. And let me also mention that already in the current framework, fishing gears that promote selectivity are, can be funded by MFAF.
El señor González Casares.
Mr. González Casares from the Socialists and Democrats.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kadis. I'm from Galicia, the first fisheries region of Europe and in Spain, of course. In my country, the sea, fisheries, absolutely key. Large areas of my country, many generations have lived from fisheries and they want to continue. So it is a hope for us that there is a commissioner in charge of fisheries who will deal with this particular issue. We want commitment. Don't speak to us about a future evaluation that we want with promises. We want action. We want more sustainable fisheries in the world. We need fleets, modern in nature, to deal with the situations before us. So there'll be changes in the regulation for the modernization of fleets. Will that exist? And will it guarantee that the tonnage of these particular vessels, whether it will be sufficient in order to deal with the situation as it exists? Will we deploy new technologies? And will we be able to serve as well small-scale fishers effectively? Will there be improvement on these particular fronts? Do you commit yourself to all of this or not? Thank you.
I will speak in my language in this round.
Well, as you know, I don't have any magic wand that I can wave and correct everything and deal with all of the problems that are out there. But what I can say is that there is the goodwill there to confront the problems that exist in the sector, the problems that you mentioned. These are problems that have been mentioned by you, by your colleagues as well. And this means that these are problems that concern the people that you represent as well. So yes, indeed, modernization of fleets, using cleaner energy for our fleets. This is something which will be of great concern for us, and whether this will take place through legislative regulation or some other measure, well, we'll have to see. What we do, however, need is a little bit of patience so that the decisions that we make are effective. And we need valid information, of course. We need to draw that information in order to draft that legislation. Many, many years, the things that you said were applicable. But if we want to wait, we need to wait a little bit to get the necessary information in order to make the necessary decisions, and correct ones as well. Thank you.
The EPP Vice Chair, Mrs. Pulfjord.
Mr. Candidate Commissioner Kadis, the critical state of the Baltic Sea poses serious risks to small-scale fisheries. Many fishers are concerned about their economic situation and whether there will be enough fish for future generations. What measures do you think that EU should prioritize to ensure that our small-scale fishermen are not forced to close and coastal family business can be preserved? And would you like to consider a review of the Baltic Sea map as one of the possibilities? Thank you.
The Baltic Sea is an example of the negative consequences of environmental degradation. This degradation has happened because several factors affected negatively the environment, such as nutrition from the adjacent area, from agricultural activities, the pollution, climate change, the increase of the temperature, a lot of munitions in the area. There are a lot of factors that degraded the environment. So we need a holistic approach in order to secure the recovery of the area. Which are the measures? First measure, we have to secure that there is no misreporting and that the decisions taken every time are the correct decisions regarding the fishing opportunities. We have to work with Environment and Agriculture Commissioners in order to implement the legislation. We have to accelerate recovery in collaboration with the scientific community. We have to build on the European projects that have already implemented there, and it's a win-win. They can offer benefits to the people that they implement them, and to the sea. So, and during the recovery period, we have also to support the struggling fishers. It's a package. There are also other measures. It's a package that we have, and I will dedicate much of my effort to the recovery of the Baltic Sea.
De Patriotas por Europa,
Mrs. Jamet from the Patriots for Europe. Mr. Kadis, I'm going to address a scientist and a biologist. When are we going to stop being so tentative? This has led to disastrous measures for our fishers. Look at the Bay of Biscay. According to the information we have, the data is partial, and it just gives a partial picture of the situation. And so decisions are taken, but without taking into consideration the fact that they will have an impact on the lives of our fishers, it will have an impact on the economy, and of course it will have a huge impact on food sovereignty. Now, we have been crying out against this for a very long time. That is why recently Sweden decided to get rid of several permits to build. So, Commissioner, are you going to break free of the dogmatic approach that is being imposed by scientists? Do you think that we'll finally be able to support the work done by our fishers? Thank you. Now, first of all, I'd like to reassure you, if I do get your trust today, our fishers can be assured, and because we will listen to them. We will listen to them in the same way as we also listen to scientists. The decisions that I take will be based on scientific evidence, but they will also be based on what I hear from the fishers themselves. They have empirical knowledge, and they can relay that knowledge to us. You referred to a very specific case, and I think that is up to the member state. We have tools to deal with these kind of situations, and that's maritime spatial planning. That's the instrument that we have at our disposal. It is thanks to maritime spatial planning that we can rein in the impact of certain decisions, because it's true that there can be knock-on effects, and that is why we have to have proper spatial planning so that there is harmony across the board. That is the approach that we are planning to take. That is the approach that we'll be taking if I am given the portfolio for fisheries and oceans.
Ahora por ICIAR, el señor vicepresidente, el señor Milaccio.
Mr. Milaccio.
Signora Presidente.
Professor Kadis, what are the actions that ought to be taken to secure in fisheries continuity so that the activity in the field can continue into the future to make it more viable? There was mention of the tonnage as well, the social tonnage. And now in Sicily as well, we're concerned about this particular issue. Now, relations with third countries, I think there ought to be measures out there in order to protect us from the various risks and dangers that exist for fishers in the field, particularly for fishers in the Mediterranean. Also, taking into consideration, for example, the activities of the Libyan Coast Guard, those have these actions have caused problems for fishers in the region.
The
response is cooperation with regional authorities, regional organizations, and of course the European Union is active in those agencies as well. And we do have wonderful examples of success. For example, GSM in the Mediterranean, they're doing wonderful work. And within the frameworks of the GFCM, very important policies can be forged. But there are implements as well that we can use. I think we ought to have true cooperation in order to move forward with rules and regulations which will focus on non-sustainable fishery practices, particularly countries that are active in regions of interest of the European Union as well. So it's something before us, something that we have to deal with. It's in our hands, so to say. And we are ready, and along our borders of the European Union, in the nearest future, the Catch digital instrument will block entry into the European Union of any product that is the result of illegal and unregulated fishing. And this also has to be incorporated into our free trade agreements, into our various commercial agreements, trade agreements. In other words, the measures that we have to take to adopt immediately to deal with unfair competition. Thank you.
A continuación, por Renew, la vice...
On behalf of Renew, Mrs. Jon Courtin. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll be speaking French. Thank you, Evcharisto. Now, in our maritime areas near the UK, Brexit has had a huge impact on fisheries upstream and downstream. In Normandy, where I come from, we have mostly small-scale fisheries, and we find our fishing grounds constantly decreasing. There's unfair competition, and our fishers are worried about the future. So, Commissioner-designate, I hope one of your first actions will be to come and visit people in our maritime areas. It's extremely important for the credibility of the European Commission and for our fishers. How are you urgently going to reassure the fisheries sector, given that quotas will be renegotiated with the UK after 2026? And how are you going to factor in regional realities with our relations with the UK? I'm thinking about French fishers fishing off Jersey and other areas. So how are you going to make sure that fishers have fair access to UK waters? And what are you going to do about marine protected areas and offshore wind farms?
Σας ευχαριστώ.
Thank you very much for your question. This is something that you asked me when we met bilaterally. We are very concerned about relations with neighboring countries. As I said earlier on, one of our key priorities is to work hand in hand with these countries, because it is through cooperation that we can get good results for our fishers. But I can assure you that when it comes to cooperation with these countries, the need for European fishers' access is going to be at the heart of this. I'm talking about European fishers' access to their traditional fishing grounds. And I won't stand back, I won't give in, because I think that this is of crucial importance. And this is also something I'm going to say to European fishers when I visit them. So when I go and visit them in their local communities, I want to hear what they have to say. I want to hear whether they have more specific proposals to put forward. We are open to hear how we can help them. We are going to focus on this if of course, I become a commissioner. If I am confirmed, as soon as I take up office, I will focus on this, and we will lay the groundwork for negotiations with the UK post-2026. And I think that by then we will be ready and we will be in a good position to negotiate a sound agreement for European fishers.
Socialistas y Demócratas, la señora Eriksson.
Now, Mrs. Eriksson, on behalf of the S&D.
Thank you very much. I'll speak Swedish. The future of the Baltic is being threatened by overfishing, pollution, and eutrophication. It affects the fish stocks, and this is something that researchers, small-scale fishers, and recreational fishers have seen developing over many years. My first question is, if you become commissioner, which measures will you take for marine areas that are subject to large amounts of pollution from agriculture and industry, but also how do you specifically intend to make sure that we're going to have more reliable measuring instruments, and that will lead to a better way of managing the situation? For the third time, I will ask, will you revise the Baltic Sea plan, yes or no? Which specific measures do you intend to take to ensure that all stakeholders, including small-scale professional fishers, will have their voices heard in the process? Thank you.
I think it's our moral obligation to listen to our fishers. And we will do that. You can be sure of that. The first letter that I received when my name came up was from small-scale fishers indeed. And now in this room, I was truly moved, and I'm moved now because I see them before me. So it is our moral obligation to listen to these people and to support them. There are a whole series of measures that we'll adopt concerning practices, and we will cooperate with the relevant commissioners. It's the Baltic region that we're speaking about right now. These are parameters which are very, very specific to the Baltic region. We want to cooperate with agencies that have experience in the region, and from my colleague Commissioner for the Environment, for us to work together to trigger activities like HELCOM, which is extremely successful in the region. I would like for us to cooperate on issues of explosives which are being used on the ocean floor in the Baltic, and there's been support, funding for such a project. And as concerns the action plan for the Baltic, I'm not going to be dogmatic on that, but it is indeed one of my priorities to convoke a meeting that will involve all stakeholders and agencies in order to be able to put together a project for the Baltic region. And this is a need that we have to deal with. We, of course, need the scientific knowledge, and we will collect the necessary information to be able to move forward effectively on that front. Thank you.
EPP, la señora Kalenek.
Madam Kadis for the EPP.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Commissioner-designate, thank you very much for the answers to the Brexit questions and for saying that you're going to defend European fishers in negotiations with the UK. So your objectives are in line with ours: competitiveness, raised profile, sustainability. You were very clear saying that your fisheries and oceans portfolio was going to be looked at from the angle of sustainability. And we also have to think about the whole sector. It's about food sovereignty. There are so many economic interests, environmental interests, and geostrategic interests, as well as fisheries, maritime transport in these areas. But there are new activities such as aquaculture, energy generation, carbon storage. So how are you going to deal with potential clashes or conflicting interests? Thank you.
Σίγουρα κάποιος θα μπορούσε να...
Some people might feel that the growing risks stem from this heightened competition and fight over our seas. But I don't think the right reply or the right answer, the right way of dealing with this would be to sideline profitable activities. So we have to look at spatial planning, maritime spatial planning, and see how we can organize all these different activities in a way that minimizes negative impact from one activity on the other. So we really have to harness best practices. I think that France has 2 or 3 examples of good practices. You can use a specific area, marine or maritime area, for various uses. You can have several activities in the same place. This is a solution that is being implemented, and it seems that it is successful. So hopefully other countries will be able to learn from these best practices. It can be a model that others can follow.
Verdes, la señora Miranda Paz.
For the Greens now, Madam Miranda Paz.
Kadis. Como eurodiputada galega, le pido que su...
From Galicia, I'd like to invite you to come, that to be your first destination. It is the #1 place for fisheries in Europe. Look, this type of fishing here, it's called a trap. It's a trap for octopus, and it is the way to protect, and it is something to protect not only octopi, but it is something which provides for numerous families in Galicia as well. So let's look at taxes and quotas which discriminate against the fleets in Galicia. We have pollution as well. This is a serious problem in an area. We have the numerous different species which are affected by the phenomena, the various natural phenomena in the region. Also, we have numerous vessels which have been decommissioned over these years. That's a serious problem that has to be confronted as well. Europe is far away from fleets, from coasts, from the communities in that area. So it's necessary to understand what the problems are of these people. Come to Galicia, come, designate commissioner. There are 120,000 in the region which are active in the sector. They play a very important role as far as sustaining the entire region socially and economically. So please come and visit us.
Well,
I want to reassure you, madam, that if I win your trust today, European fishers will not feel that Europe is far away from them. We go hand in hand, we work together, and we will come to your region to see what the problems are. As I mentioned earlier on, the solution is not by exempting certain people from particular situations. It's important to decide what the problems are, what the region affected is, and our fishers have to be part of the solution. There has to be proper consultation, deliberation, and consultation with those in the field, with the stakeholders, in order to take on board their concerns, their worries, and to make sure that their profession is one that is robust, that is viable as well. So we have to take into consideration the sustainability of the sector as well, and the viability of the work that they do. So what I do want to emphasize is that at least the decisions that will be taken at the European level, that they will take into consideration in the same fashion and with the same gravity the social dimension, the economic dimension, and the environmental dimension, all together creating a sustainable, providing a sustainable solution. That will be the cornerstone of any decision we make. Thank you.
Ahora, como diputada.
Now, as Madam Crespo Diaz from the EPP.
Gracias por su compromiso.
Mr. Kadis, thank you very much for your words about Valencia and Spain. The fisheries sector is strategic for our food in Europe, and it diversifies our coastal areas, but it is becoming a very vulnerable sector, and that is why the best way to help these areas is to make sure that the European Commission focuses on the sustainability of our ocean and seas, and we have to measure the impact of decisions on the profitability of our sector, and we also have to look at the social impact and impact on employment, as the ECJ ruling says. In my country, our sector has very important examples. We have issues with Atlantic anchovy, and in Asturias and other areas there are diminishing fishing grounds, and that makes it very difficult for small-scale fishers. So the decision is in your hands. Are you going to take into account these three pillars, the social pillar, the economic one, and environmental aspects? So that is my question to you. My first point is that if, as I said before, I am confirmed as Commissioner, you can take it for granted that the European Commission will provide support to those fishers, and not only fishers, that have been affected by the disaster in these coastal areas. And if it's not my first visit, it will be one of the first visits. So I will be going to Valencia as soon as possible to assess the damage, to talk to the people who have been affected. I've already started looking into this with my team in DG Mare to look at what kind of measures can be adopted in order to provide support to these people who are going through such a difficult period at the moment. As I said before, all three parameters will underpin our decisions. Sustainability is three-pronged. There is the economic aspect, the social aspect, and the environmental aspect. So every time we decide to adopt new measures, if legislation does not stipulate that there has to be an impact assessment, there will be at least a proper analysis of the economic, social, and environmental impact of every single decision that comes out of the European Commission. This is my personal promise to you. We're going to work together and make sure that this happens in practice.
Por la izquierda, la señora.
For the left, Madam Hazekamp.
The ocean and life below water are being threatened, and by far the biggest cause of biodiversity loss in our oceans is fishing, where, according to the IPBES, serious damage is being done to fish and unique nature reserves by bottom fishing. Do you subscribe to the scientific conclusion that fishing is the #1 cause for the loss of biodiversity, and what are you going to do to combat it? How are you going to make sure that devastating bottom fishing is stopped in protected nature reserves? Many European countries are not doing anything to protect nature reserves from bottom trawl nets. How are you going to make sure that these countries stick to the rules? Because in Cyprus, as a minister, for 5 years you did nothing, while all during that time illegal waste was being buried and Natura 2000 areas were not being protected in contribution to EU laws. If you can't manage European law in your own country, how are you going to do it for 27 countries?
Δεν θα συμφωνήσω μαζί σας.
I won't agree with you that about the loss of biodiversity, that fisheries are responsible for that. There are many different causes, such as climate change, pollution as well. It's not fisheries. Now, as concerns the second issue that you touched upon, I simply wanted to mention that the particular unit was established with standards and conditions that were established 7 or 8 years before I entered the ministry and before I was minister. During my term, many efforts were made. Well, first of all, that it was determined that the particular unit, the particular facility was problematic. Numerous different efforts were made in order to improve the situation. And with actions of my own, the issue was brought to the forefront, taken to the legal services, to the courts, essentially. It is in the courts right now, and that's a result of actions that I took. At this point, the contract has been terminated of that particular facility with the Republic of Cyprus. Once again, the case is in the courts. I don't want to say more about it because essentially it is in the courts right now. We have to wait for a ruling, and we'll wait for a notification from the Republic of Cyprus on this issue, and I'm sure you'll see that the facts will speak for themselves. Thank you.
For Socialistas y Demócratas.
For the Socialists and Democrats, Mr. Arnauto.
Κύριε Υποψήφιε Επίτροπε, οι αλληλείς των μικρών νησιών αντιμετωπίζουν πάρα πολύ μεγάλα.
Small island fishers are confronting major difficulties because of high prices, diminished stocks, inability to access European funds. What measures will you take to boost the viability of the profession and make it more robust? And something else, the targets set by the European Commission regarding marine biodiversity requires effective protection of 30% of the seas of the EU with the creation of a network of protected marine areas. Particularly, 1/3 of this area will have to be very strictly protected. How will you achieve this? How will you protect marine biodiversity? And the third question, for the restoration of 20% of our seas by 2030, what measures will be adopted to help member states do that? How do you envision the cooperation between all stakeholders, such as fishers, people in aquaculture, and local communities, so that the result of all of this will be effective? Thank you. Now, I think you'll have to give me 6 minutes rather than 3 minutes to deal with these particular questions, but nonetheless, the measures indeed will support fishers. The first and most important measure is to find how we have to make management in the sector much more logical and rational, if you like. That is a policy in itself. The common fisheries policy has a system to make more rational and more effective the way that regulations will function, the way that management will take place altogether in fisheries. That particular program lasts until the end of next year, and with this commission right now, we will discuss the measures that will have to be adopted thereafter. Secondly, we have to make sure that we have fisheries with possibilities for the future. In other words, that we don't go beyond the limits of our capability, if you like. There, we'll have to respect science, we'll have to respect what comes forth in the form of scientific research as well, and we have to protect the marine environment, make sure that we have a healthy marine environment, because it is that, in other words, a healthy marine environment that will provide and will make the profession more robust and viable. Now, as far as the 30% protection, that concerns the law on restoration of marine environments. The member states will have to submit their programs in order to achieve that particular target. And as Commission, we're ready to support those programs. There's a technical support that's an implement that can be used by the member states, incorporating it or using it in order to realize their national programs. We will cooperate, of course, very closely with the other commissioners, the relevant ones, Commissioner for the Environment, for example, and thereafter we'll see how funding will actually take place in order to achieve those targets. There can also be funding from the Aquaculture, Oceans and Fisheries Fund as well, and a number of different other programs that are out there and tools that are there for funding purposes. But I think I've gone way beyond the time limit, and we can look at this in greater detail later. Thank you.
Por Patriotas por Europa, la señora
For the Patriots, colleague Cisnit.
Commissioner-designate, in the previous term, small-scale fisheries was the activity that bore the brunt of decisions. The nature restoration law that protects a certain percentage of ecosystems. There have to be cameras on vessels, and that violates the privacy of workers. And then, of course, there is the issue of discards and bycatches. Small-scale fishers do not destroy biodiversity. There are problems for fishers when it comes to vessels. Our fishers have to fish on old vessels, and they see North African and Turkish fleets being more competitive. And all of this is happening when China is emptying the oceans of half the world. It's got a super fleet, and it is just growing and growing. So therefore, I'm wondering whether you're planning to step in and do something about this, and if so, how? I've mentioned a lot of problems, and are you going to deal with these problems so that small-scale and artisanal fisheries survives? Thank you.
Έχω ήδη αναφερθεί σε μια σειρά από...
I already referred to a raft of measures that are going to be taken, that have to be taken, and some measures have already been adopted, and these are measures in order to support our small-scale fishers. I think if the marine protected area legislation is implemented properly, then that will help. And that is also, at this point, let me say that the Oceans Pact is also going to make a considerable contribution. So if all of this is implemented properly, we will be helping the fisheries sector, because we have seen a lot of examples where having marine protected areas leads to better fishing results, because if you have a healthy environment, then there is more for fishers. Look at what is happening in the Baltic Sea. There's overfishing there, and there's environmental degradation. It's very important to look at all of this. But we need to provide support for our fishers, and we do have MEPs, the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund, and this fund can support our fishers in order to adjust to a new marine protected area. Now, you talked about cameras on board. Small-scale fishers can get these special cameras with 100% funding from MEPs. So they can cover the cost to the tune of 100%. I also talked about the CFP regulation and the evaluation of it. And once we evaluate the CFP, we'll see how far we can go in supporting small-scale fisheries. I can assure you that we will be focusing on this. Thank you.
Señor Ruiz-Sen.
My colleague Ruiz-Sen for the EC.
Thank you. I've got a few questions I'd like to put. You wrote that you want to promote fisheries technologies and techniques which help selectivity and sustainability. That's all well and good, but are you prepared to look at all forms of fishing and therefore looking at the ban that exists on pulse fisheries, that could be revised? Would you be prepared to look with a scientific background, I think you obviously have a good background for that, to lead a fact-based discussion on pulse fishery? Because I think in the past that's been dominated by politics rather than facts. The second point, on the landing obligation, you said a few things about this already. You wrote that you're happy to have an open discussion on this. Can I interpret that as saying that you're also prepared to look to see if a total ban would be necessary? Would you be prepared to look at the current derogations and exemptions for certain fish species could be made permanent, that could provide an avenue for solutions?
I mentioned earlier on that I will not be dogmatic in approach. I wanted an open discussion where we would look at the positive and negative aspects of all new or innovative approaches which would be selective in nature, which would provide to a reduction of harm on the ecosystem, which would limit any sort of undesired forms or illegal forms of fishery activities, and which would focus on the needs of the sector for sustainability. Within this particular framework, not only will we support these types of approaches, but I mentioned that this mix of issues would be one of our priorities. In strategy, in research, in innovation, in the broader fisheries sector, and in whatever that concerns our oceans as well. So we have to base ourselves on scientific knowledge, what is provided to us by the academic community, by the scientific community, in order to decide what sort of techniques and approaches we'll adopt. Mr. Christensen, please.
De europæiske fiskere, de oplever i stigende grad at blive presset fra tredjeland.
Thank you very much. There is more and more pressure on our sector from third countries. There's a lot of pressure on our fishers in traditional fishing grounds, and this has a huge impact, a huge economic impact. There are countries that export to our market, and therefore their products compete against the products of our fishers. Are you planning to use trade sanctions when dealing with countries such as the UK and Norway in order to make sure that there's fairness and justice and fair competition for our fishers? Thank you.
Ο δίκαιος ανταγωνισμός και η αποφυγή του.
Thank you very much. I can assure you that avoiding unfair competition is going to be one of our top priorities. And we're going to strive for this in many other ways. You mentioned specific countries, and I think I already referred to them. Through cooperation, we're going to try and avoid undesired clashes. This is going to be our strategic approach. When it comes to the United Kingdom, the trade agreement that we've signed does have a dispute settlement system. And in the case of sand eel, we have seen that there could be some changes. The EU has decided that if fishers' interests are affected, then we might have to resort to the dispute settlement system, especially when it comes to sand eel. And in the case of Norway, it's very important for fisheries to be seen as part and parcel of broader EU-Norwegian relations. And we also have to look at products accessing our markets. I'm thinking of Norwegian products. We have to make sure that they can also only be marketed if they respect WTO rules. So the message I'm sending out is that we're going to be using the wide raft of tools that we have in order to protect the interests of European fishers.
Por el IPP, el señor Don Nascimento Cabral.
Mr. Nascimento Cabral.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Presidente, Sr. Comissário. O setor das pescas é pilar.
Thank you very much. Yes. Fisheries is an extremely important area for the European Union in social terms, economic terms, and environmental terms. We have to manage sustainability. We have to support the fishers. We have to make sure that legislation is applied in an appropriate manner with, according to the motto, one in, one out. We don't want additional bureaucracy brought in. But there are also difficulties with the management of quotas, the fact that the ships are becoming superannuated, and we have seen a report on fleet renewal and greater sustainability. We think that the Ocean Pact constitutes a great opportunity, but we also have to make sure that areas in the outermost regions, such as the Azores, are taken into sufficient consideration. And I'm sure you'll be aware of that in terms of marine protected areas, and you can come to the Azores and talk to us about it there.
Well, thank you very much for the question. It gives me the opportunity to say that through the meetings that I had with you and other colleagues of yours from the region, it was completely understood that the numerous different specificities and idiosyncrasies in your regions, together we will support these particular regions. I just want to reassure you of that. And the existing framework already provides support, recognizing the fact that there are idiosyncrasies. There's funding through the MFAF implement 315 million, which are exclusively for these outermost regions. And the only exception to the rule as far as renewing fleets involves outermost regions. And here, under certain conditions, renewal of a fishing fleet is permitted. Now, what I would like to mention here is that these particular measures will continue into the future, and as far as the assessment of the common fisheries policy on this particular front, we'll see how we can further support and help these regions. I think it will be very, very decisive. Indeed, the visits that we'll make together to your regions in order to understand from up close the various specific elements and idiosyncrasies there. Thank you. For the Socialists and Democrats, Madam Mendia.
Microphone for the speaker, please. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. In my group, we have a very human-centered approach in our policies. I come from the Basque Country in Spain. It has a long and historical fisheries tradition, and it's generational renewal that we're very worried about. You talked about a youth dialogue in the first 100 days. We would like to know how this dialogue will contribute to this necessary generational renewal, and whether these dialogues will also be organized in specific regions. I'm wondering whether there can be one in the Basque Country, for example. You also stated that you want to take into account the European Parliament's opinions. In the previous term, my group was headed a resolution on future for fisheries that looked at generational renewal and the numerous challenges linked to that. So I'm wondering whether you're going to continue respecting the European Parliament's work and opinions. And now, on the issue of women, and the fact that they're not very much involved in fishing as an economic activity, do you think that there could be a minimum share of MFAF funds in order to renew the fleet and create the necessary conditions to make it more appealing to women? That's a lot of questions. I'm going to try and answer them as briefly as possible. Yes, we're going to listen to young people. If we don't listen to those that are affected by our policies and to those who we want to help through our policies, then these policies will be doomed. So, of course, we're going to include young people, and of course, we're going to have regional dialogue as well. And in this way, we'll be able to hear about the specific features of each and every region. I'd like to assure you that I am fully committed to respect the resolutions and decisions of the European Parliament. And I'm very happy to discuss previous decisions as well. You referred to one of them. I'm aware of the European Parliament's resolution that you referred to. It was a very well-founded resolution, and DG Mare also supported that. There's also something else that I would like to mention. There is a very similar initiative. It's called a Foresight Project. And this Foresight Project has the same title. It's called Fishers for the Future. So the same title as a resolution. And so we're looking at the skills that future fishers are going to need in the next few years. And on the basis of this study, we'll be looking at how we can tailor our policies to ensure that we get these skills and that we can attract young people to the sector. And we want to do something similar with women. We have a huge gender gap. There are very few women in the sector. So first of all, we're going to listen to them, and then we're going to analyze data relating to women's participation in the new Blue Economy report that is going to be published by DG Mare. In that report, there will be data on women's participation, and they will underpin our new policies. On behalf of the EPP, Mr. Milan Mon.
Commissioner, I would like to focus on the external aspects of fisheries. So, working on an equal playing field, I congratulate you on this. There are environmental issues, sanitary control issues, which are very, very strict, of course, the standards in Europe, which don't compare at all to what's out there, for example, in China, which is funneling products into the European Union. How will we stop this lack of equality, and also the free trade agreements that the European Union is forging with Thailand, Indonesia? Well, we cannot compete with imports of canned fish from these countries. It is a very, very difficult situation. I think we're going to have to work together. You'll have to work together, rather, with whoever is in charge of trade in the college in order to forge more equal conditions. Partnerships for fisheries with countries like Mauritania, is that something that you're contemplating? And also, I think very important are agreements with Norway and the UK, particularly on fleet issues. Thank you.
Και πάλι πολλές.
Once again, very many questions all bunched together. Fair competition, that's a priority, and we will use every political instrument that we have to achieve that. Trade agreements are one of those types of instruments, and we will work together with the relevant commissioners or with the relevant commissioner in order to make sure that criteria concerning sustainability and the demands that we have from our producers, that all of this enter in the form of criteria in these particular trade agreements. But we certainly don't want to fall to their level. We want them to come up to our level. Our standards are ones of a sustainable nature. Now, as far as what we'll have at our borders I think it's very important to have a very, very stringent control on IUU. It's very important that illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing products are controlled at our border. We need proper labeling as well. Labeling which will provide information concerning the means that were used, the types of activity that was conducted in order to fish the particular product. It's all part of sustainability. This is something which is now in the Parliament. Confronting with non-sustainable forms of fishing. This is something that we have to fight together. So concertedly, we'll work as well with the World Trade Organization to fight any sort of funding that exists out there for structures or for those that are conducting any activity which can be interpreted as part of overfishing or causing causing stocks to be depleted. So once again, if I gain your trust today, I do feel that together we'll be able to protect our fishers, and the production chain will be made more robust. It's important to do that, and part of doing that is fighting unfair competition. Thank you.
La señora Junco García.
Mrs. Junco Garcia, non-attached. Thank you very much. Commissioner-designate, thank you very much for expressing your condolences to the people of Valencia. I agree with Mr. Mato when he says we need a common aquaculture policy that will guarantee sustainable production, self-sufficiency, and decrease our dependence on third countries, and that also boost the development of coastal communities. In my region, we have issues with mussels and mussels production. There is unfair competition from abroad and these products don't fill the same standards. Do you think that your mandate will include having an aquaculture policy that will provide a framework to help those working in aquaculture? Thank you.
Η απάντηση είναι...
My answer is yes. So the answer is yes, but we always have to respect WTO rules. I did mention a set of measures that we can adopt in order to improve our position vis-à-vis competition from abroad. We also have to make sure that we have proper labeling so that European consumers have the right information. And this is something that we're going to be looking at. You talked about aquaculture and mussels. European consumers are a little bit skeptical when it comes to aquaculture and are a bit reluctant to buy aquaculture products, even though we know that the quality is very high. So that is why we will soon be starting a Europe-wide campaign in order to promote and raise the profile of European aquaculture. And of course, that will also include mussels.
Por Patriotas por Europa.
On behalf of the Patriots, Mr. Tanger Correa.
Senhora Presidente, Sr. Candidato a Deputado.
President, Commissioner-designate, there seems to be a lack of scientific consensus about offshore wind production in the Atlantic. What is the short-term plans that you have to reappraise these projects, given the factors of sustainability, economy, and employment? If you look at this map, that I'm holding up, here you can see the map with Portugal, and those are the wind parks there that are meant to be built off the coast, along the whole coast of Portugal. Can you imagine what that would mean? Basically, it would put pay to the Portuguese coast, and the fishers wouldn't be able to fish, tourism would be affected, thousands of migratory birds would be killed. We've seen this at the top of Portugal in Viana do Castelo, and these are the ramifications of wind parks. So we're going to have to stop them.
Well, this falls under the remit of each member state to plan its own, if you like, sea planning or planning on coastal areas. So now, as far as this type of planning, well, I think indeed you have to have deliberation and consultation with all parties involved for maritime spatial planning as well. And through this type of planning, we have to have use of we have to remember that more than one activity will take place in these areas, and this has to take place with the consent of all parties involved, all stakeholders. And furthermore, it ought to take place, this type of planning, on the basis of studies that have been conducted, environmental impact studies, for example. Social impact has to be taken into consideration as well. As you understand, I cannot comment on a particular map that you've shown and a particular plan that you've spoken about without more information, more in-depth information, but the authorities upon which planning of this nature ought to be based, well, they ought to base their plans on environmental impact and social impact studies.
On behalf of the S&D, Mr. Bajada.
Aziz Commissario-designate.
Dear Commissioner-designate Kadis, as you know, these seas are connected. The ocean is one. So I'm quite concerned with what you said earlier. In concrete terms, how will you coordinate different policies in the Ocean Pact without a legal structure? We cannot have a weak pact. I'm also a scientist. I come from the Mediterranean. We're both aware of the challenges. How will you work with third countries to ensure that they also follow the ambitions of the EU ocean diplomacy? And finally, in concrete terms, what actions will you take to ensure that we have robust mechanisms in our FMOs? How can we have a level playing field in the Mediterranean Sea?
And we need to ensure that we seek justice for European fishers that are sacrificing efforts to contribute towards Europeans' food sovereignty, but are currently facing injustices and aggression in the Mediterranean Sea.
Αυτό που έχω πει.
What I said is that the first thing I will harness the Oceans Pact for is to strengthen and implement in a coordinated manner all the policies that are ocean-related. These policies are already very ambitious. And we're going to have to focus on how they are implemented and how the implementation of one policy doesn't clash with another. And we have thought of various examples. And then if we have to fine-tune the legislation at some point, we are happy to discuss this with you later on. As you know, I also come from an island. And we face these competitiveness issues that you referred to ourselves. It's extremely important to tackle this unfair competition. I think that we can do this through cooperation and international institutions. The GFCM is a forum that we can invest in. The GFCM has shown us that they can help us, and that means that we can get together with the neighboring states and bring the level up to ours. The regulation on unsustainable fisheries in the Parliament is extremely important, and I hope that it will be adopted as soon as possible. It's something that we're very interested in. But of course, there are criminal offenses, there have to be joint patrols, and we have to be able to deal with these issues. So we have a whole set of measures that we can adopt in order to tackle unfair competition that our fishers face. On behalf of the EPP, Mrs. Zovko.
Poštovani budući povjereniče, suočeni smo sa veoma
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner-designate. I think we find ourselves right now in a very difficult geopolitical situation, very dangerous. Ukraine, the Russian invasion, the pandemic, and strategic security of our food as well. So with the Commissioner for Agriculture and Food, we're going to work very, very closely. And of course, the strategic aspect of food from the sea has to be taken into consideration as well. What role will you play there, I wanted to ask. And an additional question, invasive species. This is something that we have to deal with as well. In the Adriatic, we've had a number of cases of extremely poisonous invasive species. They have threatened other marine animals in the area, particularly fish. What will be done in order to fight against this particular scourge right now, in order to avoid any terrible harm caused by this particular problem in the future? Thank you. Well, this is very important. The role of fisheries and aquaculture, very important as far as food security, and what will be presented by the Commissioner, the Agriculture Commissioner, during the first 100 days, as concerns food overall and food security once again. The food security of Europeans is of absolute priority as well, and the role that we will play in fisheries extremely important, and this is something that we'll have to understand. Indeed, just 30% of fisheries products are produced here in the European Union and consumed in the European Union. The remaining 70% comes from abroad, from third countries. So in a sustainable fashion, we're going to have to understand what sort of contribution fisheries can have to food security. And there are a whole range of measures that can be adopted. But let me move on to the second issue quickly, invasive species. This, for the Mediterranean, is a huge problem indeed. With the initiative of the European Union, under the GFCM, we have the observatory concerning invasive species. This is a sector where there has to be cooperation. These species, let me remind you, don't recognize any borders, so there has to be a coordinated effort. We have to work concertedly, all of the member states, in other words, in the region, around the Mediterranean basin, and of course, nature-based solutions will play a very important role as any sort of information that we draw through research. Once again, we have to work with this immense problem together. It is of great concern for the Mediterranean basin, but not only. Thank you.
Por los Verdes, la señora
On behalf of the Greens, Mrs. Camara.
Monsieur le Commissaire-désigné, bon.
Commissioner-designate, good afternoon. Many colleagues talked about the health of our oceans, and I'm very pleased. The external dimension of the CFP plays a very important role in this respect. European fleets fish resources everywhere, including off the west coast of Africa. Obviously, it's supposed to be the surplus, and those species that aren't captured by local fishers that are concerned, European vessels have to apply these rules strictly. However, there are European vessels that have non-European flags, or that are flying non-European flags, and don't respect these stringent rules, and often anything goes. So what specific legislation would you like to put forward within the first year of your term to make sure that those vessels flagging a different flag, who sell their products on the European market, respect sustainability rules and do not compete unfairly against European fishers that do respect these rules?
Οι κανονισμοί και η νομοθεσία.
Now, IUU legislation is very stringent. And the European Commission is very sensitive to this issue. So if some irresponsible actors or irresponsible countries are taking advantage of this in order to operate unlawfully and illegally, then of course I am at your disposal, and I'm willing to take action, even if, and I'm willing to take legislative action so that we can close the door to any unlawful activities. On behalf of the ECR, Mr. Müller.
Commissioner, first of all, I want to congratulate you for a very constructive approach and your answers. I want to focus on the Baltic Sea. You talked about it already, but I would like a straightforward answer. The Baltic Sea is an environmental time bomb which cannot be ignored right now. The pollution, salinity, loss of biodiversity in the last few years. We also know that on its bottom, there are many dangerous items, conventional and chemical arms, weapons, medicines, radioactive substances, after the World War II. In the next years, the Commission has started a pilot project. However, it's just a drop in the ocean compared to the real needs. So I would like to know from you, I would like to ask to tell you to tell us how are you going to, in a long term, to clean the Baltic Sea, and are you ready to earmark financial means for this from the European Commission? Thank you.
Well, you're absolutely right. The Baltic is the most polluted sea in the European Union. From these particular material. Particularly after the Second World War, huge amounts of certain pollutants have been concentrated. It has threatened biodiversity, ecosystems, fisheries, and stocks. So indeed, we are committed to continue the effort in order to restore the region. It will be one of the many parameters which will be put into our program. The Baltic is suffering from multi-dimensional and multifaceted risks and dangers, so it has to be put into the puzzle very deftly, the puzzle to restore the region overall. We're going to build upon the work, the pilot program that you mentioned. Up until now, a number of different projects have been initiated. 25 million have been spent on those, and I can reassure you that those programs will continue on into the future, and we're ready to continue cooperation with the Parliament on this particular front. But it is one of the problems that is very, very much on our radar screen, and it will be one of those particular issues that we'll take into consideration with new projects and new initiatives as well. Thank you.
Por Renew, la señora Aguirre.
On behalf of Renew, Mrs. Aguirre Goitia Martinez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kadis. Very clear is the need to work together to transform the sector, decarbonization, increase profits and yield, work together. The generational issue has to be taken into consideration, but I'd like to ask if the role of professional organizations representing fishermen, shellfish, fisher people, and so forth, if those agencies will be taken on board as well to work together to improve the sector. And I simply wanted to ask you about the agreements with Morocco and other similar such agreements, that with the Sahrawi agreement, whether those will be looked at as well in the future. Thank you. Now, producer organizations and professional organizations, of course, they play a very important role for the implementation of a common fisheries policy and further afield as well, for the protection of people in the sector. Indeed, one of the parameters in the evaluation that will take place on the CFP involves this particular role played by these professional organizations. And if within the institutional framework that's there, if there is sufficient and satisfactory support of these organizations, and if that support facilitates their work. Of course, it's this type of support depends to a large extent on the member states. So we'll have to come into contact with the member states on this particular issue, and I can reassure you once again that we will bring up this issue, in other words, the importance of groups of producers and organizations of producers, that the necessary support be provided to these particular structures and organizations, and thereafter the institutional framework that's there to support them, we'll have to take a look at it again, revisit that, what's there, within the framework of the CFP. I will, of course, respect, as concerns Morocco, the rulings of the court, and, of course, in cooperation with Morocco, the European Commission has a very fructiferous, if you like, relationship with Morocco. We'll have to look at that particular ruling, take into consideration the issue of the Sahrawi as well, and see the possibilities of renewing that particular treaty, which was of mutual benefit. Thank you.
Por ESN, señor Dres.
Mr. Droz on behalf of the ESN.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Commissioner-designate, you said earlier that healthy sea and ocean systems are what you want to see. I think we can all subscribe to that. I'd like to talk about the shadow fleet. Russia is still benefiting from selling its oil via India and China, for example. That means that the sanctions really aren't hitting home, and they're also having causing damage to our ecosystems. So 50% are going through the Baltic, which, as you say, is one of the most polluted sea in our area. But thank God we haven't had any oil slicks on our shores. But you, as a commissioner, do you think the key to the solution could be a partnership with Russia in order to husband resources together, or should we continue trying to isolate and punish Russia? If you consider the past policies, the antagonistic policies that failed in the past, do you think they'll be successful in the future, especially given the environmental risks we're running?
Σίγουρα το θέμα των σκιών.
On the issue of shadow fleets and the Russian shadow fleet is something that concerns me, and we are worried about the possibility of an accident. If there were to be an accident, there would be terrible pollution in the environment. This falls within the remit of the Transport Commissioner. And as far as I know, there was a question put to Mr. Costas. He answered the question, it was well argued, and I would like to take on the same answer. It is the member states' responsibility to carry out the right checks and inspections, and of course the European Commission has to monitor the situation and make sure that individual member states are carrying out the necessary inspections. What I would like to say at this point is that the Oceans Pact will also tackle this kind of problem. Because when we talk about safety and security and vessels that are a potential pollution threat, then we have to take this into account when we adopt those policies that will regulate these issues.
Del EPP, el señor Herb.
Mr. Herbst, on behalf of the EPP.
Thank you very much. My question involves cormorant. They cause problems in Northern Europe, but all of Europe. They are the cause of they are threatening species which are on the verge of extinction as well. And also they affect the ecosystem. They are affecting fisheries overall. So the European Parliament for quite some time has called for a cormorant management plan that doesn't only involve you, but it offers the Commission an opportunity to come with something forward and to deal with other predators as well. In order to protect our fish stocks, in other words. Thank you very much. Yes, this was touched upon in meetings with you and colleagues of yours as well. Indeed, it appears to concern fishers in certain areas considerably. The cormorant is a species which is protected by European legislation, but it causes those problems, the cormorant that you mentioned. Section 1 of the directive has a number of different exemptions which are incorporated there. They can be used by the member states in order to manage the particular problem in the fashion that they would like, based always upon information which will have to be provided, of course. And as we are right now, we can deal with that particular problem. Now, the fund, the particular fund that's in place, the MFAF fund, can provide for mechanisms to remove the presence, if you like, of this type of bird where aquaculture activities are taking place, the cormorant, to keep it away. Now, with you and with the member states, I think together we can, through some sort of technical assistance, to do what was proposed. In other words, through technical assistance from the Cohesion Fund, we can put together a plan as to how we can confront this unfortunate situation and unpleasant one. Thank you.
Mr. Flanagan, on behalf of the Left.
The European Ocean Pact advocates for social equity and a transition to fair and regenerative fisheries. However, our small-scale fishing communities are still struggling to survive. A recent policy report highlighted that small-scale operators in the EU need different direct funding avenues due to difficulties accessing funding under MFAF. This, to me, is an unacceptable approach, given that MFAF is the main funding instrument for fisheries. In particular, many small-scale producer organisations cannot access MFAF funding to make their producer organisations actually function. You yourself, and I congratulate you on this, have acknowledged in this hearing that allocation of funding by member states needs to take into account the specificities of the small-scale fleet. A new supportive measure is urgently needed to address this. So my question is, how do you intend to ensure that the EU small-scale fishers can effectively access funding under MFAF, and will you commit to developing a code of practice for financing sustainable, small-scale, low-impact fisheries?
As I mentioned in my previous interventions, the support of small-scale fisheries will be one of our main priorities, because we recognize their important role for the coastal communities of Europe. Through the evaluation of the CFP, we will see how far we can go. It is in my plan also to issue guidelines to the member states in order to promote more fair and transparent allocation of funds. We should and we will secure more support to this very important part of our segment.
Muchas gracias a todos los diputados.
Thank you very much to each and every MEP for their questions, and I'd like to thank Commissioner-designate Kadis for his comprehensive answers. Now, let's move on to the next round, and we're not going to give you a breather, Commissioner-designate, and now we're going to move on to the Environment, Public Health and Food Security Committee, which has been invited, and Mr. Pietro Fiocchi, one of the vice chairs, has the floor.
Thank you. Designated Commissioner Kadis, you've been answering a lot of questions in a very professional way, so I'm very happy and very supportive. There are several questions, but you already partially answered to it. For example, there are a matter of harmonizing the minimum net sizes in different European countries. There is a question, but you answer regarding the Soviet ships, but also extra EU fishing boats in the Mediterranean. There are some questions regarding the territorial waters of several countries which are in conflict with other countries. I'm particularly interested, number one, how do you intend to apply, what is your approach on Nature 2000 rules? If you want to go in a very strong way, or if you're going to let the human activity going also in the Nature 2000 area. And of course, there are two big questions coming from ENVI are number one, the invasive species, which are not only the cormorants like my colleague Herbst pointed out, but also vegetable species which are coming to the Mediterranean. And last but not least, the poisoning of the micro and nanoplastic coming to the sea. Thank you.
Personally, I've worked on more than 30 research studies looking at the management of Natura 2000 sites. The sites that I focused on were on land. However, the way these sites are managed are the same. There has to be a proper management plan drawn up for each and every site, looking at which habitats have to be protected, which species have to be protected. And once that is done in a targeted way, then we also have to look at which activities can take place in these areas. Now, Natura 2000 areas aren't areas where there's a total ban. Any activity that will have a negative impact on species and habitats that are being protected on the basis of the European directive cannot take place. But sustainable practices or sustainable activities can be allowed if these sustainable activities contribute to the management goals and objectives. Now, on invasive species, this is a serious issue, especially for the Mediterranean. Mediterranean waters have become warmer due to climate change, and that means that it is friendlier environment, if you like, for invasive species from the south that are coming through Suez. And that is why all the member states and all countries in the area have to work hand in glove. And under the umbrella of the GFCM and the special observatory that has been set up by the European Union to focus on invasive species, we have to have coordinated action in order to tackle invasive species. Now, on plastic waste, it's extremely important to implement European legislation, and all those initiatives that I will support as Fisheries and Oceans Commissioner, such as the Zero Pollution Action Plan, the plastic waste strategy, and a whole raft of other initiatives that focus on the need for a circular economy and practices that will make sure that plastic doesn't end up in our seas.
Muchas gracias, señor Fiocchi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiocchi. Thank you very much, Mr. Kadis. And I'll let you catch your breath, or maybe there won't be much of a breather before we go on to the final round of questions. As you know, 3-minute slots, and we'll take this in reverse order. So the first political group is the ESN, and it's Mr. Drose.
Ja, Frau Vorsitzende, vielen Dank für das.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Now, Commissioner, I would like to come back to the question that I posed earlier on. Now, Commissioner for Fisheries and Maritime Affairs. So it's a little bit weak that the issue of shadow fleets, that you kind of glossed over it. Indeed, you said in your initial statement that zero tolerance would be there for illegal fisheries. And IUU, in other words, would be something that you would tackle. It is a major threat for fisheries throughout the world, and it appears right now that the system in the European Union to protect us against that isn't proper. It isn't effective enough, and sanctions against countries exist, but the system of sanctions against individuals who are involved in the activity doesn't seem to exist right now. So as far as transparency with regard to the owners of these particular ships that are conducting IUU, what sort of measures can be adopted against them in order to tackle this problem in an effective fashion in the future? Thank you. Zero tolerance, yes. As concerns IUU, will be at the center of our effort to fight this phenomena, this scourge. And we will do everything in order to fight against it effectively. If the necessary legislation isn't in place, I think we can fill any sort of lacunae that might exist in cooperation with the European Parliament. The Commission sets very, very strict limits on this particular issue in its trade agreements and in its own legislation. If there are any gaps, once again, we can deal with it, as you mentioned, through new legislation. And once again, I repeat, that can be done in concert with the European Parliament, so we can be more effective as far as fighting this particular phenomena. In other words, much stricter legislation, particularly if this concerns IUU, illegal, unregistered fishing.
Mr. Everding, on behalf of the Left.
Thank you. I will continue in German. Sehr geehrter Herr
Commissioner-designate, just a change of topic before the end. In the Faroe Islands, whales and dolphins are being killed in a gruesome fashion. The EU has expressed its opinion against this on several occasions and yet still maintain close trade and diplomatic ties with that area. What are you going to do to make sure that international law is observed and whale hunting is stopped? My next question. Around the world, fishing nets constitute about 10% of waste in the oceans. Millions of sea mammals and seabirds are killed because of these ghost nets. Are you going to impose on the fisheries industry the recovery of these ghost nets, or are you going to organise funding from the fishery funds so that the polluter will have to pay? Last question. In February 2023, the Commission adopted a very ambitious marine action plan in order to deal with the problems facing fisheries, such as climate change and loss of biodiversity. What are you going to do to make sure that the Member States will implement the plans for the oceans and stick to them? Thank you.
The European Union is firmly against the fishing of cetaceans, especially whales. It is a protected species on the basis of European directives. Of course, this falls within the remit of the Environment Commissioner, but I will discuss this with her and we'll look into whether the EU can do more. Although I understand that these activities involve non-EU countries, so we're going to have international discussions and take this to international fora and organizations that have these countries as members. So we're going to have to look at how we can tackle these kind of activities. I'm thinking about the High Seas Treaty, for example. We'll be ratifying this very soon. So perhaps this could be harnessed in order to deal with this. Now, on nets, we have the circular economy, and therefore one of the objectives is to put an end to nets being thrown into the sea. We're going to provide initiatives, but we're also going to make it easier for fishers by having the right facilities at the ports so that they'll be able to dispose of their nets properly. And then, under innovation, there's no doubt about the fact that we'll be looking at more sustainable fishing tools, biodegradable gear that will have less of an impact. I'm also willing to look at incentives for the scrapping of nets. On the last question you put to me, in President von der Leyen's mission letter, there is a reference to the implementation and enforcement of the current legislation. So implementation and enforcement are words that crop up again and again and in the political guidelines. So they're not only in the mission letter, but the President's political guidelines as well. And I will definitely be focusing on implementation and enforcement if I gain your trust this afternoon. On behalf of Renew, Mrs. Carlsbro.
Tack så mycket, fru.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Commissioner-candidate. I'm one of the last people to put a question. I'd like you to summarize what you want to do to save the herring in the Baltic, which are at threat mainly because of overfishing. I'd especially like to ask you if you are going to work for a new science-based fisheries policy which will genuinely build on existing data and science to take into consideration the genuine environment where fish are living today, but also in the future, and whether you'll commit to facilitate negotiations with an objective of all member states that are riparian states to the Baltic will follow Sweden's model and shift the trawling border away from the coast. I'd like to hear clarification on how the EU is going to stop Putin's shadow fleet and condemn Russians' threat to Baltic safety and security as well as fishing. Thank you.
Για το τελευταίο ερώτημα νομίζω έχω ήδη τοποθετηθεί.
Now, as concerns that last question, I think I've already commented on that. In 2 words, I would say that the Baltic constitutes one of the major challenges, or the greatest challenge that I will have in these next 5 years if I gain your trust. It is a region which is made up, or it's threatened rather, by numerous different elements and factors. Thus, it requires a multi-pronged, multifaceted, coordinated approach to deal with all of those problems. It requires proper analysis and timely information. We need fresh information which will provide us with a clear picture of what the situation is. We need that from our scientists. I base my work on objectiveness, on the objectiveness of scientists. So we have to take on board what they have to say to us and to consider what they propose in order for us to accelerate the restoration of the region. Cooperation, in other words, cooperation for the implementation of legislation for the environment and for agricultural development as well. Through activities in agriculture, you know that there are numerous problems from there. We have runoff. We have different issues of that nature as well. We already have a number of different challenges that we have to confront. So we have to work with the other commissioners as well, use the expertise that exists out there, use the organizations like HELCO, and other similar such structures, like HELCOM, look at the issue of explosives that I touched upon earlier, and see how, during this period of restoration, how we will support our fishers, which are in a very, very difficult situation. That's something that we recognize. It's one of the areas that I will visit in the nearest future in order for us to examine what the problems are up close and what the possible measures are and the way that these measures will be adopted or implemented in order to restore the region.
Mr. Nordquist, on behalf of the Greens.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Commissioner-designate. It has been an interesting few hours with you. I just want, before my question, just to make sure that we're all aware that the Article 17 in the CFP actually been existing for a decade, and I don't think it's enough just to listen, review, and evaluate. There is powers coming with being a commissioner as well to actually make sure the law is being followed by member states. So just so we're all aware of that. Then for my question, because you have been speaking about ocean-related policies a number of times, but I've heard it like a bit, you only mean the CFP and the Marine Framework Directive. But I want to make sure to understand correctly if ocean-related policies is also agriculture, forestry, it's plastic pollutions, it's pharmaceutical pollutions, it's transportation. So we actually get a comprehensive understanding of the ocean policies and how you see it as a potential commissioner. Thank you.
Everything affecting the ocean, anything affecting the ocean is, of course, related to the ocean, and it should be taken into consideration. Of course, it's different to have immediate impacts from some activities, and how important is for the ocean, some other activities that indirectly affect the ocean. Nevertheless, we have to take into consideration, all the activities that affect the ocean, and definitely most of them are land-based. It is true. So my intention is to take into consideration all the ocean-related activities that can affect the ocean directly or indirectly. So this is the framework. And yes, I referred most times in the CFP and the aquaculture and the fisheries and the maritime special planning, because these are the main policies that affect the sectors that are under my portfolio. But at the same time, there are many other policies that affect the ocean and should be taken definitely into consideration.
Por ECR, el señor Ciccioli.
Mr. Ciccioli, on behalf of the ECR.
Kadis, contiamo molto sulla...
Thank you very much, Mr. Kadis. Now, on your expertise in marine biology and the Mediterranean, 71% of the planet is covered by seas. Now, in 2023, 70% of all marine products consumed. So huge dependence, and of course that is because of numerous different aspects of fisheries that have not landing obligations and so forth. So we see an increased threat for our ecosystem because of overfishing as well, causing problems for fisheries as well, particularly as concerns the blue crab. We have our worries as well. In the long term, what sort of measures ought to be adopted in order to deal with invasive species? How do you intend to work with the member states to effectively protect our seas and protect local economies? Now, of course, the importance of this is there. We have to support we have to maintain productivity and effectiveness as far as what we're doing in fisheries, particularly in view of the situation with North Africa. Thank you. The response is yes. Of course, I agree with this particular need and demand, and we will work with those countries in North Africa because invasive species, as I mentioned earlier on, do not recognize borders or anything of that nature. They are species which are spreading because we somehow succeeded, unfortunately, in making the Mediterranean more hospitable for them, a more hospitable environment. They've come up from the south, from warmer seas, and they create problems for ecosystems, biodiversity, for species that we fish in the entire region. So we need cooperation. I think we're moving in the right direction. That is to say, the creation of the observatory on invasive species under the GFCM, and it offers us information about the situation in real time, because if we want to deal with this problem, it's very important for us to have this information so that we can manage the situation, manage the problem that exists. We need that information. And I mentioned earlier on that countries like Cyprus and Greece have implemented measures to confront the problem. And I would say that these measures are considerable in nature, but they're fragmented in the sense that they're limited to a single country. What we need is a cooperative effort. We need to work together to confront together the problem that exists, because, once again, these species do not recognize borders.
Señor Domotor.
On behalf of the papers, Mr. Domotor.
Most of the questions were related to maritime and coastal issues. I would like to touch upon another aspect, namely freshwater aquaculture. Freshwater aquaculture is an important economic sector in landlocked countries like Hungary. Beyond its importance in economic and social fabric of our rural territories, it provides fresh fish meal to the European consumers. Therefore, it contributes to a more balanced, sustainable, and healthy diet. It also plays a crucial role in protecting and conserving freshwater habitat. For example, ponds in Central Europe are vital for migrating birds because they provide recreation points for them during their long travel. I'm convinced that fisheries sector as a whole, including freshwater aquaculture, needs a reinforced and adequate funding in the future MFF as well. Let me ask you, what is your view about the financial needs of freshwater aquaculture? Could you elaborate on your plans regarding the further support of this sector? Thank you for your answer.
Generally speaking, I believe that we have to provide support to aquaculture. Because if you look at it globally, it is one of the biggest, or it's one of the sectors that is growing the most, one of the food sectors that is growing the most. Well, in Europe, it isn't budging. So I think it's extremely important to provide support for aquaculture on the basis of the member state action plans. There can be assistance even with the current framework, but once we evaluate the CFP, if we see that we need to change the way we approach freshwater aquaculture, then we're open to discussing it. So it will all depend on the evaluation. So any measures we take will be based on the results of the evaluation. But aquaculture, whether seawater aquaculture or freshwater aquaculture, is something that we're going to support because we can see that it will play an important role and contribute to food security and food sovereignty, and this is a strategic goal for the European Union.
Por socialistas y demócratas.
Mr. Clergeon, on behalf of the S&D.
Thank you very much, Commissioner-designate. Good afternoon. I'll give you an opportunity to speak about the Oceans Pact once again. You put this across as some sort of a coordination approach. Now, if that were the only thing it was intended to achieve, we would have been very disappointed. So I'd like to hear about the new tools that you'll have at your disposal to achieve that coordination, because this hasn't been done in the past. I'd like you also to come back on the issue concerning whether there'll be new legislation or not. In your introduction, you said there wouldn't be. Then later on answering one of my colleagues' questions, you said we could discuss this together. So how do you intend to work, including with us, on what will be useful to do with us and other stakeholders, and also looking at maritime spatial planning and its directive? It's very good to have an overall approach for the ocean on that. And lastly, in your pact, how are you going to take into consideration the sea basin strategy? You mentioned the Baltic, you mentioned the Mediterranean, but in general terms, are you going to support macro regions such as the Mediterranean and maybe the Atlantic?
Το σύμφωνο για τους
for the oceans, that agreement will be the strategic framework. It will be a single reference, if you like, for all issues that concern the oceans, this ocean pact. So it will be the way that coordination will take place, because there are these intertwining policies concerning the ocean, and all of these policies that we've heard about today, one affects the other. So when they come together, or when they're revised or amended, or when there's some sort of differentiation, if you like, some other political approach or orientation, all of that has to take place in coordination, taking into consideration any sort of consequences that it might have. In other words, the effect of each policy has to be taken into consideration prior to adopting it. So this effort of coordination requires open discussion. We'll have to discuss with one another about this particular matter. That's the overall approach and orientation. The level of ambition and the level, if you like, of sustainability that permeates through all European policies is wonderful. It has to be there, but it's implementation that we have to focus on, and through the various activities of a coordinated nature, we'll have to effectively implement policies concerning the oceans. So spatial planning is a very important tool, a way that we can confront the increased pressure that exists, the increased competition that exists as far as using ocean areas. At the planning level, we'll have to make sure that proper spatial organization takes place in order to reduce the consequences of very, very precious activities. We have to make sure that these activities, or 2 or 3 activities, can coexist in the same particular area. All of this, of course, is to achieve some form of sustainability. Now, this approach or orientation, if you like, well, I hope I haven't gone over time, says the speaker, but perhaps I'll stop there.
Señor Mato.
Mr. Mato, please. Oh, thank you very much. After 3 hours of questions and answers, I don't think there's a need to ask more questions, but a final comment. Now, we finally have a fisheries commissioner, and this shows the profound understanding and need that exists in this particular field. And in the various interventions, you've heard the views, and of course within the EPP we are very, very ambitious indeed. We want sustainability and we want competitiveness in the sector, and we want to, of course, balance everything, taking into consideration the environmental impact as well. So these thoughts about reform of the CFP, very important as well, because something is very, very clear, is that the number of vessels and fishers is dropping. And as far as diminishing things, we need to diminish bureaucracy. Look at the social consequences as well. We don't want to fish more, we want to fish better. I think this is a very good start. And with the Parliament, I think you'll be able to work effectively. We have to work together. We are allies. We're not enemies. The three of us, fishers, Parliament, and Commission, we have to work in a concerted fashion. Without fish, there are no fishers. And without fishers, there's no need for any sort of management of fisheries. There's no fisheries at all. So we need proper vessels. We need people there working on those vessels as well. And of course, you have our trust, and I'm sure that we will find a place, a safe haven where we can all be happy. Thank you.
I think those were closing remarks, the closing remarks that I maybe don't need to do. Yes, indeed, I agree. We're definitely not enemies, and I don't want us to be enemies. I want us to work together, and if I gain your trust, if I have gained your trust today, then rest assured that the person sitting in front of you is someone that you can get in touch with whenever you want. You can relay the problems of the people that you represent. And I can assure you that I'll be listening to your opinions very carefully. And what I'm interested in is how we can best serve the sector and how we can make sure that we have a healthy ecosystem, the ecosystem that this fisheries sector depends on. I don't think that I have much more to add to what Mr. Mato already said.
Mr. Kadis, now we enter into the final stage, the final statement of up to 5 minutes. It's your opportunity with that final statement to wrap up this hearing. Thank you.
I would like concluding to say a few words in English. Honorable Chair, honorable members, thank you again for this opportunity to present my vision as Commissioner-designate for Fisheries and Oceans. Thank you also for your questions and for our frank exchange on issues that are important to the citizens you represent, especially to our fishers, aquaculture producers, and coastal communities. Your questions have highlighted the importance of ensuring the sustainability of the fishing sector and the national resources it relies on generational renewal, level playing field, and assuring access to waters. You shared your high hopes for a new Oceans Pact and a holistic approach to our ocean. For the European Union's continuing leadership in global ocean diplomacy and for leveraging the enormous potential of our blue economy. I have listened carefully, and I can assure you that this is a vision that I share with you. As I said in my opening statement, I believe in the importance of democratic institutions and open dialogue. This is why, if I am confirmed as Commissioner, today will mark the beginning of a close and constant collaboration with all of you, beginning as soon as possible, with shared visits to our coastal communities and our fishers and aquaculture producers. Together, we can take on policy initiatives that will correspond to their hopes and aspirations, and that will address their vulnerabilities. We must leave no one behind. In ancient Greek mythology, Oceanus, half human, half fish, was the god of the river, which was thought to encircle the earth and was seen as the source of all life. Oceanus' legacy lives on today in the way we view the ocean, as a vital source of life with enormous potential. Fisheries remains the livelihood of our coastal communities, an integral part of our cultural heritage, and an essential means to our food sovereignty. The ocean holds immense potential for the European Union's competitiveness, growth, security, and environmental stability. If I have earned your trust today, I will work to ensure that the EU fisheries and aquaculture sectors remain sustainable, resilient, and competitive for those whose livelihoods depend on them now and for future generations. For this reason, I will also tap into the potential of research and innovation. I will work to protect our ocean, preserve its rich biodiversity, safeguard its sustainability, and optimize its sound use in the EU and globally. This is my vision for the new Fisheries and Oceans portfolio, entrusted to me by President von der Leyen. I believe it is a vision we share, and it is a vision I hope you will help me bring to fruition here in Brussels and in the areas you represent. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias a todos los diputados.
Well, I'd like to thank all of the members of the European Parliament. It's been a major hearing indeed for a major sector. I'd like to thank very much Mr. Kadis. We've bombarded him with numerous questions. I'd like to inform you that at 6:30 the evaluation will take place behind closed doors. And of course, all of this is according to the Annex 7. And there are 2 points that will be brought up, of course. First of all, do you consider the candidate to be qualified to be a member of the college? And do you feel that he is qualified to carry out the various tasks with which he is to be entrusted? So we will meet once again at 6:30 in Spinelli 3.2 behind closed doors to deal with these ever so serious issues involving the future of fisheries in the